Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 20th episode of Viral Banter. 20 episodes have gone by so fast, and we are so excited by how many people are listening and engaging in this new Generation Liberty show. Today, we are joined once more by four amazing guests. So let's start with a familiar face, my always insightful assistant, Theodora.
Hi, Renee. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Thank you for coming on the show again. And now he's our favourite medical student, a campus coordinator at Monash University. Please welcome Peumike.
Hi, Renee. Thanks for having me back on. Looking forward to an awesome show.
And another member from the Monash campus and someone who is surely going to annihilate the socialists in a few weeks' time. Please welcome Luca.
G'day, Renee. Thanks for having me back on. Can't do it without Peumike though. We're gonna absolutely shred him. It'll be fun.
Sounds like it's going to be really good watching. I definitely going to get my popcorn ready. And now our campus coordinator at the finest education institution in Australia, Campion College. Please welcome Elizabeth.
Hi, Renee. Super excited to be here again. Thanks.
Very excited to have you on the show again, Elizabeth. Now, today is our 20th episode, and I thought on our 20th episode, we will look back about what has changed over this time. We started this podcast over 5 months ago to give a voice and a platform to young people's views during the pandemic, as we thought there wasn't enough young people's views out there, considering how much of an effect it was actually having on young people. As you know, as time went by, the COVID talk got a little bit repetitive, and we have talked about many other topics, many other news stories, philosophy, and all things that our audience are interested in. But today I thought I would ask you all, after these 5 months, what changes in government, in society, in the way that we live our lives have shocked you the most? So what is something happening now that you could not have predicted or even imagined, 5-6 months ago? So Luca, I'll start with you.
This is a really good question, actually. Peumike and I, a couple of days ago, we rewatched a movie that is an absolute classic, V for Vendetta, as a matter of fact. And obviously, we had to watch over Zoom because, unfortunately, we're not allowed to see anyone. But we watched V for Vendetta, and I think the thing that shocked me the most was as we were sitting there watching the entire time, we just kept remarking like, wow, Daniel Andrews, oh, dictator. Oh, yeah. This guy sounds exactly like Daniel Andrews. Oh, they brought in dictatorial rules as a result of some kind of disease that happened in the past. Wow, that sounds familiar, right? All these different things occurring in a movie set in a dystopian future, we were able to relate to our current state. And that, I think, just shocked me the most. It's like we're like frogs being slowly boiled, basically, right? And suddenly we've woken up now and we're living in this state where they're trying to pass legislation where you can be jailed for your likelihood to commit a crime. Like, it's so insane to me that suddenly we've gotten to this point and people have just been subservient. Like Australians that have this reputation for being, larrikins, that kind of thing, have just become subservient to this dictatorial government. And that, I think, is the most shocking thing.
Yeah, it is really worrying, just people's response, and that I stand with Dan, that hashtag has still got a lot of traction behind it, is really, really bizarre to me. But Elizabeth, you are in the much freer New South Wales, as am I right now, as I manage to escape. Woo! We try not to rub it in how much freer we are. But does the contrast between the states really shock you? And also, what changes in Australia over this time have shocked you the most?
100%. So I have quite a bit of family in Victoria. So it's been very interesting to sort of see the contrast between the states and the different ways that we've handled things. And I'm very fortunate to have avoided the Orwellian lockdown in Victoria. And I'd certainly say something that really shocked me was the curfew that was brought in Victoria. I never thought we'd ever get to a point where you'd have a curfew brought in, and just seeing videos of the police presence, like massive police presence, everything from like increased surveillance and like the militarization in society in general, I thought has been pretty scary. I'd also say that the police, like, we know that they're a really important body to like protecting the peace within a society, but we've obviously seen, specifically in Victoria, where powers have been abused and arbitrarily administered. And so for many of us, it's sort of just been like, I personally feel like I've lost a lot of faith in the police as an institution. I've sort of lost a little bit of respect for them because of the powers I've seen that have just been blatantly abused, and some of the injustices that have been going on. So I'm definitely fortunate to be in New South Wales, where things are getting better. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with you that it is really worrying to lose your faith in something like the police and something that has so much power over your ability to run, to live your life. So it is a bit of a scary precedent that they are setting now, especially in Victoria. Now, Peumike, you're a medical student, so you may have a slightly different perspective on this than the rest of us, but what shocks you most about this brave new world?
Yeah, well, what's really shocked me the most, Renee, and I think Luca was kind of touching on it before, it's how readily Victorians in particular were able to just give up our freedoms and dignity for the sake of public health. Now, as a medical student, I completely understand the rationale behind many of the restrictions in place. But what people don't realise is the point when we cross that line and it becomes quite dictatorial and counterproductive. And I think what people have to understand is that you can be against the lockdowns and be pro-public health measures as well. It's not as black and white as those who grovel at Daniel Andrews' feet seem to believe. In a way, it's similar to my shock at how easily Australians have been bowing down to authority without even questioning policy. I mean, where has that traditional Aussie larrikinism gone? It's a darn shame. And like Luca was mentioning before, we were watching V for Vendetta recently. And I think both of us were quite shocked at how pertinent the movie is right now in Victoria. And the lessons it teaches us on coercion and autonomy and the grey area between justice and tyranny are very, very important right now. And there was a very strong quote in the movie that I can quite distinctly remember. It's that people should not be afraid of their government. Government should be afraid of their people. And I think that quote's very, very powerful right now, and it's something that we should really keep in mind as we continue going on into the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That quote seems very pertinent right now. Theodora, you're in regional Victoria, so you've had a slightly different experience to those in the city. But in this crazy new time, what things have worried you the most?
Yeah, this is a tough one to answer because, like, as the others have said, there's been so much that has been completely unexpected this year. And I would agree with the points that everyone else has already raised. But I think that, like, also the confluence of having not just a global pandemic, but also some incredibly violent movements happening at the same time has been really scary. So, like, on the one hand, we've never seen so much authority exercised over our personal lives, especially in Victoria, like with the curfews and everything happening in Melbourne, a woman being arrested in Ballarat for posting on Facebook about a protest, and like drones being used in Melbourne to make sure that people are following the rules, people getting slapped with like huge fines for doing mundane things like going to a shop that's 10 kilometers away from home instead of 5. But on the other hand, while all of this has been happening, we've seen in America the BLM protests spiraling out of control, with cities burning, looting happening, people trying to defund the police and everything like that. Statues being torn down, people trying to revise history on a daily basis. So, like, I've talked about this before, but like immigrants and the children of immigrants to Australia have been saying for years that these kinds of things are hinting at sort of soft totalitarian tendencies in our societies. And that's really been everything that's happened in 2020, I think, has really vindicated them. So that's probably the main thing that has me worried over this period, is just the crossover between extreme petty regulation of daily life and this descent into chaos in like other parts of the world. It's just not a good mix at all.
Yeah, I really agree. And I think something that Douglas Murray touched on a recent podcast I was listening into really worried me. And it was, you would think when the world is faced with something like this, a pandemic, that the petty identity politics would kind of phase into the background, that when you have legitimate issues, things like microaggressions and stuff wouldn't matter anymore. And I think the thing that really worried me the most is kind of this doubling down that we've seen on identity politics. These, like, you know, stories of coronavirus hurts women more. Well, what? No, actually stats show that men are more likely to die. And then the response to that was, well, yeah, men are more likely to die, but women are more likely to suffer. You know, certain races are more affected by the pandemic. Or there was a particularly bizarre article released in the UK, which was, I'm afraid to be buried under the wrong gender. And it's like, I think most of us are just scared of being buried. I think that should be the bit that you're most scared of. Like, after I'm dead, call me a man. I'm totally fine with that. Like, I just don't want to be buried in the first place. And I think that's really worrying, is that this could have been a time where people could come together and stop worrying about the little differences and, you know, categorizing themselves into groups. But we're seeing, especially a reaction from the radical left, that this stuff is actually more important than ever, when I think they should have, you would hope that it would have gone the other way. But to go to the other side of the spectrum, I thought I would ask you all, if you've seen any unintended positives out of what's going on, or what certain signs that give you hope for the future and how you see a way out of what we are in right now. So Elizabeth, I thought I would start with you.
Thanks. So I would say certainly the fact that because of lockdown, a lot of people have had to spend a lot more time at home has been a bit of a blessing in disguise, because I know for my own sake that it's made me think more about the home and family life in general, which I think is a really good thing, because as we know, the family is the bedrock of society. And I think we sort of live in a world that can be very fast paced and very like bit of a rat race, running around like headless chickens sometimes. So I think it's good to just be like, obviously not the best circumstances, but if you are at home and you have to be with your family, you can spend more time with them. And, you know, I've seen people take up a lot more traditional arts, like, you know, cooking or sewing, all sorts of things, which I think is really awesome. People get new hobbies. So yeah, I think that's really good. And I'd also say I'm really hopeful for the future, because I think when we look back at these times, we'll have actually really evaluated the way that the authorities handled the situation. So we can sort of wake up to some of the really grave injustices that have happened, poorly made laws, arbitrary rules, things that have often done little more than hold back the economy and freedoms that we deserve.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that. And Peumike, what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, well, I think not in spite of, but because of the hardship, we've been forced to reevaluate what we truly value and find important. I think Emily was touching on that there at the end there. And I think through this difficult time, and this is a point that many people like Nietzsche make, we begin to introspect and develop more refined judgments and outlooks on life. And I think most people now truly appreciate the importance of autonomy and the bonds and safety of family that Emily was talking about, and the inherent desire among us to be loved and to love freely without coercion and restraint. And all of this is quite terrific, because it not only develops oneself internally, but it stimulates engagement in all those factors which either regulate or promote the internal realm, notably politics. People who otherwise aren't engaged are now engaged in the political system, because they realise how much it can truly impact one's life. People now know the importance that state governments play in Australian politics. They're becoming more aware of the inefficiency of bureaucracy and red tape. And those new people who are becoming more politically active are seeing things because of necessity for the way they are. And I think that can only be a good thing for democracy, and is why I'm very, very hopeful going into the future.
Oh, that's really good to hear, Peumike. And we've touched on family quite a bit. And Theodora, I know that family is very important to you, and you're from a very big family. So have you noticed some positives during this time as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really easy to just get bogged down in negativity when so much crazy stuff is happening in the world. But I think for me, and for a lot of other people, it has been nice to focus on personal matters and family matters a bit more than you usually would, because like the daily grind of life can be pretty exhausting, whether it's studying, uni, or work, or whatever it might be. So we tend to lose track of some other important things, like connecting with family and actually being in a domestic setting rather than the 9 to 5 grind all the time. So, I mean, obviously lockdown is a bit of an overcorrection though for that, for the lack of time we spend with families. But this, I think, will hopefully remind us that we need to reprioritize things in life every once in a while.
Yeah, I think that is one of the positives that has come out of this, definitely. And Luca, what changes and positives can you see out of this time yourself?
Well, I think this is a little bit of a strange one, but I'm just going to pick up on a point that Elizabeth made, which was about like, we're seeing now the older adage that absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And it's hopefully people will wake up and realize that we are now the example of what not to do in the future. And I think it's worth going into a little bit of depth here just to kind of understand exactly to kind of show how this all fits into that framework of like, we have a guy with absolute power now and he's going to use it. So like, Theodora, why do you reckon Andrews got rid of the curfew?
No idea.
on the face of it, it's like, oh, case numbers are going down. Okay, he must be getting rid of the curfew, right? Yeah. But then you look at the bigger picture, you're like, hang on a minute. At the same time he's gotten rid of the curfew, he's trying to bring in the most radical extensions of police power we have ever seen, right? Where they can jail you if someone reasonably believes you are likely to break lockdown laws, right? And these laws, by the way, give that power to police, anyone who's considered an authorized officer by the chief health officer, right? An unelected person in the first place, right? And you can also be detained indefinitely without trial. So there's no one to define what reasonably believe means, which is usually the role of the courts, right? These are the most radical laws we have ever seen. So then it begs the question, well, why is he actually getting rid of the curfew? And it was really interesting because the morning of when he announced he was getting rid of the curfew, I was sitting around the table with my family, we're eating breakfast. And Dad said, he's going to get rid of the curfew today. You watch. And we went, well, why? And he goes, well, because there's a Supreme Court challenge coming up, right? There's a woman from Victoria who lost, I think her business was originally making like $20,000 a week. Now it's making only $400 a week, right? And she was challenging the legality of the curfew for damages, right? That's coming up in the Supreme Court. Combine that with the fact that a royal inquiry, which was already a waste of $6 million, right? Combine that with that royal inquiry whose outcome was it is likely that the curfew would be found to be illegal, right? It would be no stretch of the imagination that government lawyers said to Andrews, okay, Andrews, we need to get rid of this curfew because when it comes to court date, right, we're going to argue, okay, we don't need to consider the legality of the curfew because it's gone already, right? Now, hopefully a good judge will say, no, we need to consider that anyway and set some kind of precedent. But mark my words, Supreme Court, government lawyers are going to argue that. Right? Once you realize the way in which things work, the ways in which like, it's not about protecting people anymore, right? Maybe it once was, but we're seeing again, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And this government is now going out of its way not to protect its own people, but has become actively antagonistic to its own people, right? When you have the vice chief of police on television saying that their own citizens are, quote, batshit crazy, right? And dogs going back to eat their own vomit. Yeah. An arm of the government that is supposed to be impartial and purely enforce the law. When you have a representative of that saying that, your government has become antagonistic to its own people, right? And when Peumike said, straight out of V for Vendetta, the government needs to be afraid of its own people, it's not anymore. Right. And we are seeing, hopefully a positive out of this, is that people will realize that the way things are structured is flawed because it allows someone to gain absolute power and to use it. And we are seeing again that a government has gained absolute power and is using it for its own ends. Like once you understand the way in which things work in this framework, we had to go a little bit of depth here because I'm sure people want to hear this, right? It's like once you understand how this all fits in, that decisions are made based on their own protecting themselves, protecting Andrew's self, protecting the government, then you realize that it's a power game. It's a power game. The people are second thoughts to how am I going to protect my reputation and myself? Like the woman who was arrested in Ballarat for trying to set up a protest under stage 3 restrictions when BLM ran riot. under stage 3 restrictions in Melbourne. It's completely arbitrary. Why? Because her protest was against government policy. If that's not dictatorship, and if people don't see that as dictatorship, then I don't know if that even be considered a positive. But I hope that through things like, this podcast that we're doing, people realize this is complete and utter dictatorship that we're living under. It's not going to happen. It's happening right now. We are frogs being slowly boiled. And I think people will wake up to that. I hope people will wake up to that.
Yeah, I think people are waking up. And I know, Luca, that one of the things I've seen as a positive is there's much more discussions about our levels of government and also how our government operates, particularly conversations around federalism, around how much power the states have. Personally, I am lean more federalist, but the real problem that we have right now is the states have a lot of power and no responsibility. If we were actually following how federation was actually initially laid out, the states, yes, they would have this power, but they would also have to raise their own revenue. And right now they don't raise their own revenue. Any problems that they cause, they don't have to pay for at the end of the day. And I think people are realizing that more and more, that is an unworkable system in the long term. And I think discussions around that are really good. And I think more and more people are realizing that we live in a country run by bureaucrats. It's not run by elected officials. It's run by unelected bureaucrats who have enormous amounts of power and also who are massively overpaid. And I think more and more people are realizing that. And I think the public service is not doing itself any favors with its outright arrogance to not accept minor pay cuts, or in this case of the ABC, to actually request a pay raise during this time. I think most of the public is looking at that and going, what the hell? We are suffering and you want a pay raise, which we will pay for. I think a lot of people are definitely waking up because of that. But now, actually, we are going to move on to another segment, which I thought would be quite fun. At Generation Liberty, we like to talk about what we can learn from the past. And we've kind of touched on that with kind of movies in our discussion so far. But I thought I would ask you all to pick a classic book and explain to the audience why you think it's particularly relevant now. So explain why you think the lessons or the warnings contained within this classic novel are still applicable. So I thought I would start with you, Theodora, as you are a known bibliophile. So what classic book have you chosen?
Well, thanks, Renee. Being a bibliophile is all I aspire to in life, so I appreciate that. So the book that I've chosen, it's a bit of an underrated classic from the 20th century, and in my opinion, it's one of the greatest books ever written, just putting it out there. So it's called The Master and Margarita, and it's by the Russian author Mikhail Bulgakov, because of course I'm going to pick a Russian book. And so the plot is absolutely fantastic. It's about basically the devil and his supernatural entourage arriving in Moscow in the early days of Stalin's regime, so late 20s or early 30s, when Russia has gone from being a country which is rich with cultural and religious tradition to a nihilistic place where nobody is even permitted to express belief in God, let alone Satan. And so because of that, Satan can cause a lot of mischief in Moscow because of that nihilism. And so the title characters of The Master and Margarita are this writer who resembles the author Bulgakov, and he has his life destroyed because he writes a book that is considered to be anti-Soviet. And Margarita is just the love of his life who motivates him to preserve the manuscript of the book and preserve it for future generations, because his novel is just out of time, in the wrong time in history. So the plot is it's pretty complicated, and I won't spoil it, but in every other page, you'll see something in the text that jumps out as being relevant to our time. And the Soviet way of living with eyes and ears everywhere rings true today, when those eyes and ears are social media, or perhaps the lockdown hotlines where you can dob in a neighbor for breaking the rules. and the Soviet obsession with credentialism is mirrored today with like our 21st century reliance on experts. So at one point in the novel, a character isn't allowed into a particular building because he doesn't have a card proving that he is a writer by trade, right? Like it's not enough to write to be a writer, you have to have the certification, which I thought was an interesting parallel to today's version of credentialism. And we see also the impacts of like nihilism and materialism, which Dostoevsky wrote about and which are still impacting us like a century later. And it's like if Dostoevsky predicted campus socialists, then Bulgakov predicted cancel culture, honestly. So like, but like, I guess most importantly, the book is about censorship of ideas and also the immortality of ideas. There's this famous quote from the book that is just, manuscripts don't burn. So no kind of repression can ever entirely censor an idea. It's going to live on. And that's something that this author learned the hard way. Like he spent 12 years writing the book. He even burnt early drafts of it because it was basically a death sentence if the authorities discovered it. And he died and he left the manuscript with his wife, and she was only able to get it published in the 60s, like 25 years after he died. So it's not just the plot of the book, but like also the history behind the book is about the resilience of the human spirit. And one of the coolest things about the book is that despite like Satan walking around in Moscow, despite the elements of fantasy and surrealism, everything seems really real. And there's like no better book you could read in 2020 when things you couldn't have predicted 6 months ago are coming to pass.
Thank you, Theodora. I definitely need to add that to my reading list. It definitely sounds like a fascinating read. And as you said, a forgotten classic. Now, I thought I would pass off to you, Peumike. What book have you chosen as a relevant classic?
Well, I've chosen Renee, Le Petit Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I have the original French version with me here, but it's been translated to more than 250 languages. And I've chosen this classic story because it's reflective in its nature, but also quite aspirational. For those of you who haven't read Le Petit Prince, I won't reveal any plot details, albeit you don't really read it for the plot, but it's more the genius way in which this story, which otherwise might be considered a children's book, examines fear, uncertainty, and isolation, and the perils of a narrow and stagnant worldview. In that sense, the author likens that stagnancy and stubbornness to adults' perspectives on things, and that the thing that we should most aspire to is to ironically return to what we were like as children. The inquisitive, creative, imaginative, non-judgmental, never stagnant minds of kids. And it's that inquisitiveness that's really at the crux of happiness. It's how we introspect and explore the world around us. And the story describes it as an active process. We can't be lazy and expect everything to magically fall into place. And I think all those messages are something that the world really needs right now, and I couldn't recommend this little book enough.
Yeah, I actually like the sound of that. It reminds me of a Picasso quote when you talk about returning to childhood. He says that every child is an artist. I think we all just have to remember that the trick of being an adult is remembering how to be. I'll have to double check that quote, but yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes, is that Picasso quote. And you can see that almost in his work, that he starts off very realistic, actually, if you look at his original work, and he strips more and more back as he goes on. Luca, first off, I would like have you read either of the books that we have mentioned so far, and your thoughts on those selections? And also, what book have you selected as your relevant classic?
Well, look, unfortunately, I'm not a French connoisseur like Peumike is, so I have not read that book, neither in its English translation nor its nor its original French. But I will have to get around to it. Neither have I read Theodora's, actually, because it seems that even though I'm into Russian literature, I'm not quite the connoisseur of Russian literature that Theodora is. So, like you said, Renee, I'm probably going to have to chuck those onto my list. But the classic that I picked is, look, a classic that everyone knows, a classic that everyone enjoys, a classic that people still don't yet seem to understand fully and seem to understand the full applications of. Of course, I'm talking about 1984, right? Because look, okay, You guys have picked amazing books. I'm going to have to read them, but I just feel like 1984 just still has so much to offer in terms of understanding, for example, the mechanisms of bureaucracy that keep people subjugated, the ways in which fear is used, fear of the other, fear of a war, fear of disease, fear of starvation, fear of whatever is used to keep people subjugated, right? Because in the hierarchy of need, let's be honest, you're not going to worry about a tyrannical government when you're trying to get your next meal. All of those lessons come from that book. And even though it's brought up time and time again, even though it's brought up, people still don't see the parallels between it and what's going on today. And it's mind-boggling to me, considering it's a book that has been analyzed so many times, a book that everyone, like most kids are reading it in high school, right? And yet we still live in a Victorian state that re-elected Daniel Andrews and is allowing him to wreak havoc on our state. So like, let's be honest, even though this book has been talked about time and time again, people still don't see the application of it and still haven't learned the lessons from it. So I think it's worth bringing up again and worth reading again and worth reanalyzing and applying to our time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That book will always have a relevance, but does feel particularly relevant right now. Elizabeth, I thought I would throw to you right now. What classic book have you chosen as your relevant classic?
So the book I've chosen is The Politics by Aristotle, and it's a classical piece of work that is just amazing. I've been studying at the moment in my course at Campion, and obviously I think we all know who Aristotle is. He's quite the well-known philosopher, and the work goes through and speaks about the intricacies and the foundations of politics and government and the different forms of government. And I can't think of a time more relevant than now, when we're questioning what role the government has in our lives and the extent of their powers, particularly with different injustices and arbitrary rules that are going on. And Aristotle does a really good analysis of the different structures and the way that government should be used in our lives. Specifically in relation to, things like tyranny and mob rule. And it's a really great read, and it is obviously a very old ancient work, but it's completely relevant nowadays to all people, just to really understand what does it mean for authorities to be involved in our lives, and to really start thinking and thinking critically about the way that we interact with those who are above us and the way that we interact with other citizens and what it means to be good citizens and to be virtuous. And I think it raises some really important questions that is an amazing read for all people.
Well, thank you for that, Elizabeth, and thank you all for those recommendations. I've definitely got quite a few things to add to my reading list. I think I'll say what I think is a relevant classic right now, which may seem a bit obscure considering its topic, but because Generation Liberty Book Club is coming up, I actually reread or actually re-listened and found The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde on Audible, read by Stephen Fry. And I think that it has a particular application to young people right now. It's discussions of aestheticism, of hedonism, of moral relativism, and also obsession with kind of the aesthetic, I think is very, very relevant to a young generation which is obsessed with social media. And also right now, when we are at this time where we are kind of looking at I think lots of people are questioning their foundational morals. And I think this book is a really good way to kind of reassess where your morals lie, and to also see that, there is peril if all you seek is pleasure and hedonism. It's not going to end well for you at the end of the day, though I don't want to give away too much. But I'd highly, highly recommend that. Oscar Wilde's only novel. There's also quite a few film versions of it, but I would start with the book, and I highly, highly recommend the Audible version read by Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry, as many of you may know, is a Oscar Wilde fanatic, and he reads the book with really with real great passion, and you can see that he absolutely adores the text. But now we are going to revisit one of our favorite segments on the show, Viral Banter Battle. On this week, Luca and Theodora will be battling it out on the topic of Cold War history. Now, Luca and Theodora, I think you've gone up against each other before. And was it Theodora who won last time, or Luca?
I'm pretty
I think
sure
it was Theodora.
I think I got Dostoevsky's middle name, but I don't know if that got me the win.
You do. So we decided that like the last question means you won, even though I had like a massive lead. But I was like, okay, he got the middle name. He can have it.
Oh yeah, I think he just okay. So Theodora has some glory to win back today. Yep. Okay, so we'll start with a relatively easy question, I think. What year? Oh, do you have your buzzers? Actually, I got to check. Do you have buzzers?
I have a teacup and a teaspoon.
Nice.
Okay, so first question. What year did Stalin die? I'll give points for the closest as well. Theodora?
I'm going to guess 1953.
Luca, do you have a guess?
I'm pretty sure she's correct. Can I guess the same thing?
She is correct. But she got in first, so that point goes to Theodora.
Okay, I'll give it to her.
Okay. This one's an interesting question. Which Soviet official defected to Australia in 1954?
Ooh. Wow.
Okay, no idea with this one. I'll give you the answer of not.
Wait.
Okay, Luca.
Pretty sure it was a Vlad. It was one of the Vladimirs. I'm pretty sure I'm guessing like half the Russian population right now. I'm almost entirely sure he was a Vlad. He was a Vladimir, and I seem to recall because I think I was reading about this somewhere. I seem to recall his last name was like Petra or Petrov or something.
You've got it, Luca. It was Vladimir Petrov.
Yeah, okay.
How did you know that? I've never even heard of him.
I think I was going through some Wikipedia page or something. No clue. Or we were playing the Wikipedia game, I think, maybe.
Well, that's 1-1 so far. Okay, next question. The Bay of Pigs was a failed invasion of which country? Theodora?
Cuba.
Correct.
Yes.
Too much speed.
Yeah, got to get that spoon tapping out fast, Luke.
I can tell you which year it is for a bonus point.
We'll leave bonus points.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay. Next question. In what year did construction start on the Berlin Wall? Theodora?
1960.
Luca, do you have a guess?
I'm going to go a little bit later. 1961?
Correct, Luca. It was 1961. Very close. It's 2-2. In which country did the Soviet Union violently subdue a democratic revolution in 1956? Luca?
I'm going to take a quick guess. I'm going to go with, I don't think this is correct, but I'm going to go with Ukraine because I know there was that whole thing where he was trying to basically starve them out. The Soviet Union was trying to starve them out. I think, it was some kind of, it was basically a genocide. I can't remember the exact name of it. Like 5 million people died of starvation.
The Holodomor.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one.
It's not that.
Ukraine?
Yeah. Okay. Theodora, will let you have a guess. Which country did the Soviet Union violently subdue a democratic revolution in 1956?
My year 11 history teacher is going to be so disappointed in me for not knowing this. Yep. Nothing's coming to mind, honestly.
Okay, it was Hungary.
Should have known, but didn't. Oh well.
Such a shame.
Okay. This question is a little bit tricky. When did the Korean War end? Theodora?
I'm just going to guess like 1956.
Okay, Luca, do you have any thoughts on this?
Peumike, you covering your face because you're tired or because you are really sad at our responses?
I may throw to Luke. I may throw to Peumike if he thinks he knows.
1953.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure it coincided with like
Actually, none of you are right. None of you are right.
It was 1953.
There was a ceasefire in 1953, but no formal peace treaty was ever signed. So technically, the Korean War never ended.
Oh,
Wow. That's not fair.
wow.
That was one of Zach's trickier questions. So it's still 2-2. So this is going to be the tiebreaker question. So get your buzzers at the ready, Luca and Theodora. How many states did Reagan win in the 1984 election? Theodora?
Wasn't it like 50?
Ooh, Luca?
I'm going to chuck it over to Peumike. I've got no idea.
From what I can recall, is it like all but the first one? All but the opposition's home state, so 49?
It was correct, 49. But since Theodora and Luca didn't get that right, the bonus question I'll give you is, do you know the name of the state, the only state that he didn't win?
Oh. Peumike looks like he knows.
Can you just give Peumike the win?
I think Peumike's won this.
I could be Minnesota. I'm not sure. Is it Minnesota or?
Yes,
yeah.
it is correct. That is Minnesota.
That's 2 points for Peumike. Just saying.
So it's 2 points for Peumike. 2-2. So it's a draw 3 ways across the board. Okay. So that. Oh, I wonder if I could. Is there any other question that I could throw to as a final tiebreaker? Okay, I'm gonna get one last question. Okay, I'm gonna throw to a question about the great Ronald Reagan. In what years was Ronald Reagan president? So the start of his presidency to the end.
Almost entirely certain. It was from 81 to 89.
Correct. So Luca has run away with this one again. So Theodora is definitely going to have to come back for her revenge another time. And that was definitely a nail-biting finish with much help from Peumike on the sidelines. But I'd like to thank you all for an amazing 20th episode of Viral Banter. So thank you to Luca, Peumike, Elizabeth, and Theodora. If you are not a member of Generation Liberty yet, what are you doing? You can join at generationliberty.org.au for only $10, and you will get an awesome welcome pack, including books, stickers, and lots of other fun stuff, worth way more than $10, and also updates on shows like this, upcoming events. We are starting to have events across Australia now. It's very exciting, and all things liberty and young people. But thank you for listening. And I've noticed that I've continued to use the sign-off beginning with stay safe. And I think we've all had plenty enough of safety for the time being. So my new sign-off for now will be, make sure that you stay curious, stay happy, and stay free.